Welcome to Indie Author News Podcast number 11 with Michael Gallagher. Today, we are very happy to welcome number one best-selling author Dan Petrosini. Dan pumps out 4 to 5 well-received, character-driven police procedural stories with snappy twists at the end every year. Discover how to build gritty, real-to-life people in his episode. Have a refreshing take on character development and learn storytelling from Dan's candid explanations. Hang on at the end of the podcast and let the author get you into the mood reading a favorite passage from his best-selling Luca Mystery book 5, A Cold Hard Case. Good morning, Dan Petrosini. It's a real pleasure to have you here today. You know, as I read your books, I think about a character that I love, Harry Bosch. Your detective, Luca, brings the reader into the hard stuff of life. Your books are easy reads that leave no stone unturned. What I like is that your character is more real than Harry Bosch, who seems hard to believe in sometimes. He's such a hard ass.
I strive for reality because when I'm, as a reader, and also when I'm watching a show or a movie, it has to be real to me. And I agree with you at Harry Bosch. Although I wish I created Harry Bosch and the success that gone on with it, I do find him hard to believe. And I gave up watching the TV show I think that Amazon had on it. And I only read a couple of his books. I live in the real world, and so does the character that I created for this series, Detective Luca.
So what brought you to writing hard-boiled detective stories, Dan?
I enjoy mysteries, and I always, like Hitchcock, for instance, I like unpredictable endings. I love twists. I love being fooled by either a writer or a director of a movie or television series. And I strive to do the same. I try to create a scenario where there are a carousel of suspects, all of them credible, so that the reader is really, bounces from subject to subject as the murderer. And that's what I strive for.
I love the way Luca is loyal to his woman. The man's man is kind of out of favor today. Do you think that influences potential readers in their buying decisions?
I would hope so. I think you have to be very careful today, although it's a dangerous place if you have too much philandering. I think you'll turn off the women readers. It's not a conscious effort, though. It's probably some of my own personal beliefs that seep into the story, much as though you try to keep him out. At the beginning, though, he was married, and he was quite a ladies' man. And he kind of saw the light, I think, and found a good life partner.
How many detective stories have you written in the last year, Dan?
Probably 5.
5 in 1 year. Does pumping them out like that change your writing style?
It's been an interesting journey, and I believe many writers are similarly situated. I believe that I've gotten better at it. Right? I'm sticking with a story, sticking with a character, a formula that I believe works. So it makes some of it easier. There are a lot of challenges in it. Like, again, most writers who start out, it takes them several years to get the first book over the finish line. And I was the same exact way. And I did what everyone else does. I start a project. I'm in love with the project. Now I'm 20 or 30,000 words into the project, and I hate the project. I realize it's not working. I can't go on. I don't know how to get this to conclusion, and I shelf it. What I realized is that even when the words don't want to come, you must sit in the chair and make them come. So it's a lot of discipline, and it's hard. We have this thing that everyone terms writer's block. It happens so often that if you allow that to deter you, you'll never complete a project in a timely fashion. It's just simply impossible. And the other interesting thing that I found is that sometimes when you're writing, it comes easy. Not a lot of times, but sometimes it comes easy. And you feel like a genius. And you read it back and it sounds great. And then the other times, most of the times, you're struggling. You're pushing it forward. You're pushing the story forward. And I had a sense when I did that the writing wasn't as good, the story wasn't good, that it would suffer. And I found that now when I go back and read it, I cannot tell whether it was easy or quote-unquote hard to write, but sections. It's seamless, and they're all of the same quality. So even though it feels like it's hard and it feels like it might be forced, it comes out as good as when we are quote-unquote inspired.
Do you plan your books, or do you write by the proverbial seat of your pants?
I've morphed like many folks have. I started off as a pantser, and I ended up with 100,000 words that I had to craft into a story. And it was very frustrating because the story was essentially out of your head, and I wanted to move on to something else, but now I had all this work to do. And also I found that I left many, many holes, as you just go totally by the seat of your pants. And then I became an outliner, and I felt it was too constrictive. First of all, writing a great outline is difficult, very, very difficult, because you have to see the whole story through to its conclusion. So now I use kind of a hybrid approach. I write a quick outline. I think about the story that I want to do, put down, let's say 20 or 30 lines, somewhat chapters or development of the story, and then I just begin to write. I write in Scrivener, so I kind of put little chapters for myself in there, just headings of, let's say, scenes or a broad overview of what's going to take place in that particular chapter. And then I set out to write. I find that allowing myself a little more creative leeway, the characters could take you to places that you would not have been able to go when you were in a strict outline. And some things come to you when you're in a story. You're in a story, like in my particular case, writing a murder mystery, and I want to have 4 or 5 different suspects that are credible and a couple of throwaways, but nothing like a red herring. As I'm writing, I come up with ideas to maybe connect a character in some way that actually enhances the mystery about what's going on that I couldn't have predicted if I would have sat down and wrote a really formal outline.
Have you ever written yourself into a corner?
Oh, yes. Yeah, several times. several times.
How'd you get out of it?
Well, you have to think about it. And what I recently, it's sitting at my editor's, I have a book that I sent to my editor on about almost a week ago. I had this original idea, and I started to write it, and I went through, and I realized that I really didn't believe in it. It was kind of a conspiracy, and I'm not a conspirator. Buyer, because I always believe that the best way to keep a secret, the only way to keep a secret between 2 people is if one of them is dead. So I don't subscribe to that. But I had this great idea. I thought it was a great idea, and I started writing this book as that, and that was going to be the murderer, if you will. And I started to go through it. I felt that I personally didn't believe it, and I said, this is a problem. So I had to then think about how I was going to shift the whole story to a couple of the other suspects that I had. And I started to follow those threads and strengthen them really dramatically. I started to realize that the original idea was a great one, and it was actually, when I started to read it back, I said, wow, this is really good. It surprised myself, but I still didn't go with it that way. And I was stumped, as we do, and this speaks to production. When I hit this particular case where I couldn't go forward, I didn't know how I was going to go forward, because I felt like I invested too much in this one thread that I now, quote unquote, didn't believe in. Instead of sitting there and not being able to do anything, I gave it a lot of thought, but I continued to write other parts of the book that had to be written anyway. And I kept my momentum going, and I kept my production going. I'm not a fella who writes a lot of words. I read these people in some of these groups, and they're 5,000, 8,000 words a day, and I just don't know how they do it. My goal when I set out to write a book is to do a minimum of 1,000 words a day. And using that rough estimate, that will give you 60,000 words at the end of 2 months, which is in my genre, is pretty close to where you need to be. Sometimes I'll do 2,000, sometimes I'll do 700. But I always strive to get that amount done each day. It's a 7-day a week thing, too.
How did you come to know so much about police procedures?
I'm an individual who has a high level of curiosity. Part of the reason why I love writing is that it allows me to research subjects that I would never come in contact with in my normal life. I'm constantly reading papers. I'm reading, about DNA collection, forensics. There's so much medical, the legal aspect, and I'm not trained in any of those areas. But I've read so much, and I have a couple of contacts that I rely on that are law enforcement professionals, either sergeants or police officers that I've been friendly with over 20 or 30 years, and I sometimes bounce ideas off of them. Situations, is this plausible? What happens when the FBI gets involved in a case, et cetera, with the interaction between the different agencies and strategies that police use. So I rely on those contacts, and I really learn a lot myself. I really do a lot of research.
Okay, one of the things that makes your characters so real for me is the health problems, Where does that come from? How do you focus on that as a part of your character development?
Could be the fact that I'm 60 years old now.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's a part of life. People get sick. People die in our lives, and we see people, friends and family members, and possibly ourselves, dealing with a sickness or some problem, health issue, and it affects their lives. It really affects their lives. So I think to leave the health subject out of a character, I think is what like a Marvel comic book, if you will. He's not a Superman. He's a regular guy that has the same exposure to illness that we all have. And you go wake up one day, as he did, essentially, even though he had a problem, and he ignored it like we all do, right? You have this little nagging problem, and you go, I'll let it go, and the next thing you have a big issue. So in his case, he did. And what actually, it was interesting, to me anyway, how the type of cancer he had, which was bladder cancer. I was at a cocktail party one night, and I hadn't seen this one friend in a very long time, and he goes on to tell me about he had gotten bladder cancer and this whole story about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, and he was telling me the inside stuff of it, which I put in the books, how it affected him going forward. Even like simple thing, you have to sit to go to the bathroom instead of standing like men usually do. And the fact that you lose your ability to feel it, you have to go because your nerve endings are gone. Things like that. What I found very interesting, and I researched it afterwards, and I said, wow, this would be something that I could stick in a book someday.
So that's quite interesting. I find it really brings the character to life for me. And I'd like to sort of switch gears a bit here. Could we talk about marketing spend? How much do you spend to launch a book?
Just on marketing, so not on like editing and cover and things like that?
No, for now, okay. Just for the marketing part, the advertising part.
For the initial release of the book, I spend somewhere in the neighborhood of like $500 to $1,000, let's say, to get the book out in terms of promoting its release. And that's spread amongst, some of these sites, book promotion sites, which outside of something like BookBub, which I've never received. I've never got a BookBub.
They're pretty hard to get,
Yeah.
They've got some algorithm that's really hard to meet. The only one I've ever heard that's possible to get is if you've got dragons on your covers.
Yeah, that could very well be. And I think there's no question about it that if you're wide, then it helps your chances to secure a BookBub deal.
What about the advertising? What about those little ads on the bottom of BookBub? Do you ever use those?
I have, and I have a few running. I personally have not been able to do well with those.
But you seem to be doing well in general.
Yes. I play around with Facebook, but you have to be careful with those folks because they'll spend your money,
Yeah.
Before you finish a glass of water, the money's gone, the budget's. But I do use AMS. I also have been playing around with Pinterest, which is kind of a newer format for folks.
I don't know that one.
Right. So Pinterest is essentially like a photograph. People save images. There are a lot of book folks out there. So I created a couple of quote unquote boards. So that's how this platform works. So I do that. And then, some other some book promotion site ads. I generally don't do too much free. I'll never put a new release for free. I don't believe in that. I don't want to devalue the work that I put into it. And I understand there's a big strategy about going free for the first book in a series. And I played around a little with that, but I don't like to go free. And I think that many of these sites now, most of the subscribers to those sites are looking for free.
Where do you choose to spend the money? Let's say you're deciding to write an ad for Amazon ads, and do you write them yourself, or do you do it?
Yes.
Yeah, you write those ads yourself. So you go through that whole process, writing a little blurb yourself, and how long do you test them for?
I'm terrible with that.
Yeah.
I'm terrible with that because, like most authors, and I know and I get it that you have to put more effort into it, and I've been promising myself to do a little better. And in fact, the last 2-3 weeks, I've been taking a little bit closer look at it. Now, since the old dashboard was terrible, right? And you had to go through all those convoluted ways to download the data and to try to analyze it. And, Brian Meeks had that tool. I gave up on it. It was just too much effort. The new one is a little bit easier, the new dashboard, that you can look at your results, impressions, etc., on a day-by-day basis if you want to. It's still a lot of work, and I have a lot of ads running. I really have a lot of ads running, and many of them are not performing well. But one thing I have noticed, if you concentrate too much on the ACOS, right, which is your supposed return, that only counts the sales. It doesn't take into account the Kindle Unlimited reads, the page reads.
Yes.
Yeah, I've just factored this out just in terms of books, right? So you take the number of page reads, you divide it by your average number of pages in a book. 65% of my book sales come through KU.
Huh. Boy.
Yeah, that's crazy. For every 3 books I sell, I'm having 7 downloaded in the Kindle Unlimited.
And do you have a mailing list?
Yes, I have a mailing list that presently I've just pruned it down, kicked 1,200 people off. Or actually, they kicked themselves off because they didn't open them for, over several periods. And now I have a 4,000. My list is 4,000 strong at the moment, and I haven't engaged in any kind of effort to try to grow it recently. But I am contemplating doing a shorter book as a marketing lead-in to funnel some readers to introduce them to this particular series.
How long did it take you to get to the 4,000?
Probably 3 to 4 years.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it took some time, yeah.
Yeah, it's a rough slog. I'm just starting that process right now.
Yeah. It's difficult because I tend to have a very long newsletter. So in my newsletter, I highlight what I'm doing with my writing a little bit, what my new work is and what the work in progress is type of thing. But I also try to put a decent sized article about wine, because I'm a big drinker and I drink too much wine, and I've learned a lot about it, and I try to go basic, and I also try to do something inspirational, an article on self-esteem or something of that nature. It's something I really believe in, that everyone should pursue their dreams. They should shut out all the negativity that they hear from other folks, and especially quiet their own inner voice. That's the loudest voice you'll ever hear, is the one inside your head that tells you you're not good enough, and I'm stupid, or I'm this and that, and just start taking step by step towards whatever goal or objective you have, and after a period of time, you'll realize that you're getting closer. It's like writing a book. Again, if you only wrote 100 words a day, at the end of the year, you'd have 36,000 words, and that's something. And 100 words is not much.
Yeah, that's a really nice idea. Any other projects you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'm writing another book. I just started because, as I said last week, I sent the latest one into the editor. So I don't let too much time go between putting down one book and starting another one. And I try to keep a couple of ideas active in my Scrivener projects. I start a little project with Scrivener. I have a sci-fi idea that I really want to do, but what had happened to me, I wrote a book about 6 books ago called The Final Enemy. It was a sci-fi book, and it was right after the first book in the detective series. And that book, the first book, was called Am I the Killer? And it's a very interesting story about it, but that book did very well, Am I the Killer? And I started to write book 2, and then this idea came to me about science fiction, and I don't read science fiction, I don't write science fiction, I don't watch science fiction. But the story just wouldn't go away. So finally I decided that I had to do it, right? The idea was actually brought to me by someone else who gave me an idea, and I took it, fictionalized it, and I had to write that book. So I wrote that book, and that book actually did well. But the problem was that I confused my readership and my newsletter folks about who I was. Was I a mystery writer, or was I a sci-fi guy? Right? What I should have did in that was have a pen name for the sci-fi.
Now, that makes so much trouble, though. You've got to have two,
I agree with you. Now you have double marketing.
Yeah.
That's the thing we all hate to do, is why do I want to increase my workload? So I backed away from that. But I do have this other idea that I really love, and that's been sitting there. And then I have another project that I started to frame out that's not a detective series type thing. It's not a police procedural, but I don't know if you would call it a coming of age.
Yeah.
For somebody who's 30s type of a story involving music, because it's something else I'm very near to my heart, because I play saxophone, jazz saxophone in a couple of settings. So I wanted to have a little music part in one of these books, and I have a pretty good story that I just want to get a few more volumes of the detective series out before I veer off into another direction.
Thanks so much for taking the time out of your writing day and being here, Dan. And I've really enjoyed myself, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
I would love to do it, and I tip my hat to you for this. I'm a podcast consumer. I love it because I learn so much listening to other people in the writing world, the music world, and just in life in general. And I think this is an excellent endeavor on your part, Mike. And I've listened to not all of them, quite all of them, but at least about 8 or 9 of the ones that you have out. And every one of them I learned something from. So I would urge any listener to go through the whole catalog of podcasts that you have, and it won't be a waste of time. You'll learn something.
That's really nice of you to say, Dan, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you.
This excerpt is from A Cold Hard Case, Book 5, and a Luca Mystery. It was time to do what I kept putting off, go see Debbie Boyle's mother. I don't know why I was surprised, but the victim's mother and her daughter could have passed as twins. Kathy Boyle's shoulder-length blonde hair even seemed to be cut the same way her daughter's had been. They had the same nose. The major difference was the younger Boyle was athletic, but the mother was thin and frail. She might be suffering, but her steely eyes sized me right up. I've been waiting a long time for something like this. Come on in. The house was bright and neat, but quiet. There was the hint of lemon pledge in the air. We sat down. The coffee table between us held 3 small photos and a large picture of her daughter in a party dress. As I mentioned over the phone, your daughter's case has been reopened. I know you have questions about it, but be aware I'm unable to discuss certain aspects. Do you finally have someone you believe is responsible? We have new information on the individual we're pursuing. Who is he? Can't discuss that, ma'am. Why not? Someone killed my daughter. I understand, Mrs. Boyle, but it's premature in nature, and it wouldn't be fair to release information until we're certain. You're not certain, but you reopened the case? That's correct, ma'am. The new information prompted me to review the case file, and I'm taking a fresh look at everything. Above and beyond the new information? Yes. I want to be certain that everything is closely re-examined. You never know what you'll find with a new set of eyes. I knew it. The case was mishandled. All I can say at this point is that I'm reviewing the entire investigation. If and when something changes, I promise you'll be the first to know. She eyed me suspiciously. I hope so, Detective. You have no idea how difficult this has been for me. You're right, ma'am. I can't imagine the misery you've had to endure. But I want to bring whoever did this to justice, and I promise I'm going to do my best to solve the murder's death. My family deserves better. My children lost their father. After he passed, we picked up the pieces and recovered. When Debbie was taken, I lost the will to live. I went through the motions for Brian, but he deserved a better mother than I was able to be. You did the best you can, ma'am, and I'm going to do the same for you. I'm sorry to be negative, but it's been 25 years since my baby was ripped out of my arms. I'm thankful, really I am, that you're looking into this. I'd like to ask you some questions, some backup information to help me get a picture of her.
Thanks for being here, #1 Amazon best-selling author Dan Petrosini, and sharing your insights with, people who are trying to learn how to get into this business. And thanks out there in podcast land for listening today. Hey, if you enjoyed the author reads part of the show, please let me know by leaving a short comment or review. Have a great one.